Welcome back to the Take a Chance on You podcast, hosted by me, Alexandra Forsyth. Today, I am at the DTX Technology Conference here in London, and I just listened to a very fantastic panel discussion, and I'm joined today by two exceptional ladies, Emily Hall-Strutt and Tree Hall. How are you both doing?
Good, thank you. Still buzzing from the panel session. It was really great. Great energy.
Yeah. Wish it could have lasted longer. That's always how I
Yes.
feel about these things.
I did, and I mentioned that I was sat at the back, but when I watched this panel in particular, you had such enthusiasm and you were so excited, and I think you all shined bright. It was fantastic. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.
But the main topic for the panel was inclusion and that kind of neurodiverse angle. So I think it'd be really nice, both of you, if you wanted to introduce yourselves a little bit more and maybe talk about that panel, because I think you raised some really important points.
Thank you. We're just looking at each other now, not sure who's going to speak.
Yes,
first.
we're in person.
We're in person. We're doing this live, so anything could happen. So I'm Tree Hall. I am the CEO of Charity IT Leaders. And that's an organisation that supports other charities in getting the best from their digital technology investment. But I also have my own company called Neuronique, and that's the umbrella under which I do coaching, I speak, I do training, development, and a bit of consultancy around inclusion and equity and belonging, which is a really important word, predominantly around my lived experience of being neurodivergent. I'm late diagnosed autistic and ADHD. Both my children are autistic ADHD. My husband's dyslexic and definitely ADHD, but he hasn't gone to get the diagnosis. And it's a subject that is just so important to me. We have to support people to be the best they can be in the workplace. And that's why I talk so freely about my experiences.
Absolutely. And Emily?
Yeah, so I'm Emily Hall-Strutt. I am the director of Next Tech Girls. We are a social enterprise aiming to close the gender and skills gaps in the tech industry. So we work with teenage girls and young women to inspire them to pursue tech careers and then give them the network and the skills and the opportunities that they need to actually kind of help them on their way into the industry. My previous career was in the civil service. I was in digital technology in government for a very long time, and as a kind of passion project, led on a lot of DEI work there as well. So something that I've cared about for a very long time. I also am late diagnosed ADHD. I joined the club about 18 months ago. So in my mid-30s, had just given birth to my second child. It was a video call diagnosis. I was breastfeeding my baby, and he was sat having a little nap on my lap while I had my assessment, which is a very interesting experience. But yeah, I guess for me, there's the lived experience of, I didn't know it when I was younger, but I know now, having grown up, neurodivergent, growing up as a woman. And then also, I know it's very common, I'm learning anyway, that it's very common for people with ADHD to have quite a strong sense of justice. And so I've always had this kind of inner activist, is what I like to say, and really wanted to kind of not just stand up for myself, but in fact, much more than that, stand up for other people. So especially in my role now, I view it very much about representation rather than necessarily diversity. I think, unfortunately, the word diversity has been overused and has lost some of its meaning in recent years. But for me, it's about representation. So, the tech industry should represent the society that it's building technology for. I think there's lots of reasons for that. There's loads of studies that have been done that prove why that's important and why it's actually good for companies and, for the bottom line, actually, if you have a more representative team. But also it's about making sure that the technology that is developed and designed and built is fit for purpose and that it works for everyone and that it's safe for everyone to use.
I think that's fantastic. I always say the guests serenade me and then it's just time for me to go home. I don't need to say anything else now. But it's been such a fantastic opportunity to listen to you both on the panel and then have you join me here today. I think with neurodiversity, I've always said it's a superpower to be neurodiverse. I think we're really creative. I think we're problem solvers. I don't believe we're any different to the next person sat next to us. So it's an interesting time. And definitely, from my background in cybersecurity, I think when it comes to training, when it comes to workshops and Tree, we've spoken about this. My brain works a little bit differently. I don't believe I can sit there and take a course online for 4 hours. That's just really not going to benefit me. I need to be in person with people. I need to be asking questions because I always have loads of questions to ask. I need answers, and that's what makes me thrive. And I guess that's why I love public speaking so much, because it's being in front of an audience?
I think ultimately it's about understanding that everyone's brain works a bit differently.
Yeah.
You know, some of our brains work in similar ways to some other people, but very different from some others. And I think it's about just having that level of understanding that, you know, if you are a leader in an organization and if a certain way of working suits you, probably it will suit some other people in your organization, but the likelihood is it won't suit a lot of others. So it's just making sure that you've always got that kind of awareness and sensitivity of the fact that we're not all the same and
Yeah.
our brains don't all work in the same way. And so, you know, people do need different
Yeah.
ways of working and different kind of setups to be able to do their best and to thrive, whether it's at work or, you know, just in their lives more generally.
Why? And go ahead.
Well, I was just going to come in and say on that it's also about lifting everybody. When we create workplaces that allow neurodivergent people or disabled people or people from different backgrounds to come in and thrive and feel that they belong, what we actually do is uplift the entire workforce. And we shouldn't think about inclusion as being, well, firstly, it shouldn't be the end goal. I think inclusion should have a goal, which is belonging. We want people to feel that they belong and not just that they're tolerated or that they're a problem to be solved. But it's also about creating an environment where everyone can uplift each other and understand each other better, rather than seeing it as this group gets something and I don't have it. And we talked a little bit, Alexa, about the kind of privilege of leadership. And I'm very fortunate in my role. You know, I'm a white woman. I have a senior job. I'm hugely supported in my job. I'm married. I've got a lovely home. I'm definitely what you call middle class. I have a huge amount of privilege. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But what I have to do as a leader is to recognize that that privilege is not afforded to everybody. And there are things that I have the capacity to do and the safe space to do that other people don't. And therefore, it's my moral, ethical imperative, if you like, that I use that platform and I use that privilege to be able to speak for people who don't feel that they can speak, but also to create space so that they can speak, to hold that space for them when it is not necessarily held by others for them. And I think as leaders, that's what we all should be doing.
Yeah. Because we've spoken about how there are some people who have neurodiversity and they're very introverted, and then there are some that are very extroverted. So, as you say, creating that space for all types of individuals with neurodiversity and without neurodiversity, it is just about leading with empathy, having compassion, communicating, and just helping. Definitely agree with that.
I remember reading something recently about if you've met one person with ADHD or autism, you've met one person with ADHD or autism. And it's that understanding that, yes, okay, if a person has received a diagnosis, it's because they've displayed certain traits or behaviors or had certain experiences that are similar potentially. And there might be some overlap there with other people who've had a similar or the same diagnosis, but they're still individual humans with individual life experiences. You know, there'll be different things that each of those people struggle with.
Yeah.
So it's viewing each person as an individual with all the many kind of layers that they bring, rather than kind of trying to fit people into these kind of neat little boxes, or, you know, having these blanket policies and then just expecting everyone to make them work.
And then it begs the question for me why people don't speak out more about having autism, ADHD, because, as you say, possibly being put in a box, being labeled, means that they feel different and they don't want to feel like that. So they choose not to speak out.
I think there's so many reasons why people don't speak out. One of them is that they may not realize, they might be like me. I didn't get my autism diagnosis until I was 47. The diagnosis came a year later. There's a forgotten generation of people, predominantly women, actually, and disproportionately black and brown women who were not diagnosed as children and haven't had that support through their lives, who probably still don't even realize that they are neurodivergent. So they don't speak out because they don't know.
And that's such a good example of lack of inclusion. And that's because all the early studies around ADHD were done on white boys.
Yeah.
So for a very long
So
time, there was no understanding that adults could even have ADHD. You know, it wasn't possible for an adult to request an assessment or receive a diagnosis until not really that long ago. And the assumption was still that it was only boys and men that would have it, or that, you know, if a girl or woman had it, it would have to look exactly the same as it does in a boy or a man, which isn't the case. It looks very differently. So there's a lot of layers there.
There's a lot of layers to unpack. But the other reason why people don't speak out is because in the past they may have done so and been treated unfairly as a result of that disclosure. I know that there are many autistic people who have disclosed in recruitment process and suddenly miraculously that job interview doesn't materialize now, or they've gone to the interview and not disclosed, and it's the interview's gone fantastically, they've been offered the role and then they disclose, and oh, suddenly there's a reason why the role isn't available anymore. So often people don't speak up because they are afraid that there will be negative implications.
And imagine how tough that is for us and for everyone else that's having these
Absolutely.
late diagnoses. And I think people need to look at this slightly differently and think about the fact that if all these people are only suddenly now as adults being diagnosed, you know, we've failed all those people, for such a long time. All those people have just been left struggling on their own, thinking there was something wrong with them and not understanding why things were harder for them than it was for other people. It's not that it's a trend and suddenly everyone wants to have ADHD. It's that for a very long time, people with ADHD, it wasn't even something on our radar to consider asking, is that something that I might be struggling with?
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And I think the other problem is that we talk about this, or certain media and some people in positions of power across the pond talk about autism as being an epidemic. There is no autism epidemic. Autistic people have always been here,
Mm,
but in the same way that,
We're
that
just only seeing them now.
our diagnostic criteria are changing, our ability to recognize it is changing.
mm,
The fact that we now understand that women can be autistic and ADHD, that is what's changing. It's not that there are suddenly more of us, it's that we are recognizing and being given a voice. And frankly, it's not easy. I know people say, oh, you can go privately and those private clinics will give you a diagnosis because you paid for it. No, they don't. There might be one or two bad actors out there who are giving out diagnoses almost, like sweets. But generally speaking, it's incredibly difficult. And I say this as somebody who's done the diagnostic pathway for both, incredibly difficult to get a diagnosis of
mm.
autism and ADHD.
And also, why would a person go through that very lengthy process and either pay a lot of money or wait years? I was waiting years for my assessment if they didn't already think probably this is something that I'm struggling with, and it would help me to find out if that's the case. People aren't queuing up to be told they've got ADHD. People aren't. It's not something that people necessarily want to have unless they think they do have it
Yeah.
because they've read into it a little bit, they've done some research, they've been struggling with certain things and they've suddenly had this moment of realization that actually there could be a reason for this and there could be some help out there for me.
Yeah.
So yeah, that kind of belief that there's this sudden wave of people who are pretending to have ADHD or, who are somehow cheating the system and getting told that they have a diagnosis or given a fake diagnosis, I think there'd be very, very few cases where that's actually what's happening.
Well, it's a difficult one because when you go back to wanting to get a diagnosis, I mean, that could take, as you say, 12 to 18 months. I know the NHS waitlist is a couple of years, I think
Several years
still.
in some parts
Yeah.
of the
Yeah.
country. Yeah.
So going private, for some people, that could be an option if they do want to invest and spend the money, but it's expensive. It's a difficult one because you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. You have these feelings internally, something, you want answers for how you feel in certain scenarios, certain situations. So what do you do? My next thought really for both of you is having that late diagnosis. So how did you get there and what would you recommend to anybody listening going through the same thing?
Shall I start on this one? So my autism diagnosis came about because I was researching. So we already knew by this point my son had ADHD and autistic diagnoses. We knew that my eldest was struggling, but we didn't know why. And as a non-binary, biologically female person, their presentation of autism was very, very different. And it was when I was reading about the different ways that autism presents and I hate to gender it, but it is a gendered thing, when it presents in people who are female or have been brought up as female, that was when I had my light bulb moment as well. It was me on a page. So that triggered a special interest, an autistic special interest. I did every online test I could get my hands on, and they all came back. I may as well have had a klaxon over my head. I was autistic. But I thought before I did anything about it, and I needed the official validation, even though it was pretty clear, I wanted to check it with someone. So I asked my husband and I said to him, do you think that I might be autistic? Because I've been doing this reading and I think I might be. And I was honestly expecting him to say, no, I don't think you are. You're just seeing it everywhere because you've been reading about it. And he just stood back and went, well, yeah. Like it was so not a surprise to him.
It was obvious.
It was obvious. And I said, well, why didn't you tell me? He said, well, it's just a label, isn't it? Which is lovely to hear. He said, I love you because you're you. You know, labels don't matter. It's just a box, isn't it? But we've been together for 25 years and you know I need a label and a box. Why didn't you tell me? So the next stage for me was to write up, again, autistic special interest coming to the fore, was to write up the way that I present and all the traits that I have and the things that I find difficult. And armed with that and printouts of all the tests that I'd taken online, I went in to see my GP and I said, well, I think I might be autistic. Would you be happy to refer me for a test? And she said, what makes you think you're autistic? And I produced this huge weighty tome. It was like War and Peace by the time I'd finished. And I kind of dumped it down on her desk and I said, well, this. And she just thumbed through it and went, yeah, I'll refer you this afternoon. And that was that.
And how long did you have to wait after that?
Well, I was quite fortunate. I waited just over a year.
Right. Gosh, it's still a year.
And
That's still over 12 months. It's a long time.
it is a long time, but for most people, that's just the start.
Yeah, it's the start of the journey. And it is. And Emily, I'll let you speak, but it's a journey you're now on, really, in a beautiful turn of events. You now get to share your story, which you did so eloquently this afternoon during the panel. So Emily, you go, and then we'll talk a little bit about the panel to wrap things up after.
Yeah, sure. I think what you just said about it being a journey is really important to remember as well. I think you can have certain expectations of what a diagnosis might give you. And I think I had these expectations of the diagnosis and also of the medication that I am now taking for my ADHD, that there would be this like miracle cure. You know, it's like once I've got that diagnosis, that's it. I'm going to suddenly be this way better version of myself that just finds everything so much easier and my life's going to be so much better. I'm going to be a way nicer person to be around, and similar with the medication. And, you know, actually, sadly, it turns out there's not these kind of quick cures in that sense. But I think, yeah, viewing it as a journey and in a sense, if you are diagnosed, that is the start of the journey. You're then unpacking, you know, in our case, a good few decades worth of life, where you've viewed things in a certain way, you've behaved in certain ways, you've reacted in certain ways to things. And I'm constantly noticing things that I'm doing or thinking or saying and thinking, I've always thought like that. I wonder if that is because of my ADHD. So my situation was, what triggered me to kind of go for diagnosis was actually my mum had spent the day with my cousin and her children. My cousin's child, I think she was very young at the time, let's say like 4 or 5, something like that, and had just been diagnosed with ADHD. My mum was talking to me about it afterwards and said, "No, I went to see your cousin today. Her daughter's just been diagnosed with ADHD, and it was bizarre. She was exactly like you when you were a child." She said, and it made me think, I wonder if you, again, my mum at the time assumed that ADHD was a childhood thing. So even when she was telling me this, she kind of thought, it's not that it's something you're dealing with now, it's something that maybe you had as a child, you know, past tense. And I thought, what are you talking about? No, I didn't have ADHD as a child. Because I also thought it was a childhood thing and thought it was a thing that you know, kids who do badly at school have ADHD. That was my belief, my stereotype. I did very well at school. It's not that I found it easy, but I did very well. I had to work incredibly hard to kind of overcompensate because I was kind of a perfectionist and felt I had to do really well. But yeah, so it was a while after that I then started kind of looking into it and thinking, maybe there is something there. And I think I was speaking to some colleagues about it, working in the kind of DEI space within government. We had a group for neurodivergent diversity, and I'm speaking to one of the women in that group who was telling me about her ADHD diagnosis and all the things that she was saying, where she'd obviously learned these are coping mechanisms that I've had, or these are traits that I've had as a result of my ADHD. It was all very much resonating with me. I was like, okay, there's a bit more to this ADHD thing than I realised. There's a lot more ways that it can affect you than this kind of stereotypical image that I had. So I eventually did I did a lot more of my own research, similar to Tree. Went spoke to the doctor about it and got referred. I think from my first conversation with the GP, I think it was 2 years before I got my diagnosis. I was told it would be 3. So I got, somehow it improved in that time period, and it was 2 years. But the neighbouring boroughs of London, to me, I was told were 5 and 7 years on average. So they were like, aren't you so lucky? Yours is only 3. I was like, that's one way of looking at it.
No, because 5 to 7 years. I mean, if you had to wait 7 years, that's almost a decade of waiting. I know for both of you, it's slightly different because you've already had a late diagnosis. So it is decades for both of you. But if somebody were thinking, okay, there's a possibility I'm showing signs of ADHD or autism, neurodiversity, waiting then 7 years from that date, a lot can happen. What is it? Your skin cells reproduce What's the thing?
I
They
think it's every
reproduce
8 years.
every 8
Your whole
years.
body is entirely new
Yeah.
or something.
Entirely new again, and you think, well, if that's happening, I'm going to have an entirely new brain by the time I get it. So will I even still have it? And there's that argument, I think.
I think as well, just speaking to that length of waiting time, as an adult, that's difficult. Imagine if you are a child and you're stuck in an education system, which even more, and this is no discredit to the amazing teachers and people out there, but our education system is not built for neurodivergent children. And if you are undiagnosed neurodivergent, then education, to be blunt, can be hell. And waiting all those years, you will be out of education by the time you have a diagnosis.
And there's also, I was listening, I think it was to another podcast that was mentioning your frontal lobe doesn't fully develop until the age of 25. So think about also, we've got Gen Z in the workplace right now, but Gen Alpha slowly tailing behind. So if we're not providing facilities for them, they're not going to be able to cope with work life at all. So it's just a ripple-on effect. You have school where you're not being possibly listened to or heard. Then you go into the workplace, again, you're not being listened to and heard. And it's just a constant battle in a way.
I work with a lot of Gen Z and Gen Alpha people through girls, mainly through Next Tech Girls. And there's a lot of stereotypes about that generation, Gen Z especially, who have started sort of entering the workforce, that they're very entitled and they have very high expectations. And I think we need to flip that on its head a little bit. Actually, they're a generation who are advocating for themselves,
And
who know what good looks like, and they're not taking the crap that our generation has just put up with for a very long time.
I think it's fantastic.
They're empowered. I think that's amazing. And we should be celebrating that. And we should be looking at, if they are leaving companies because of certain policies, well, why are those policies in place? They are the future of the workforce.
And that's a really strong point. They are the next generation leaders, if we're honest. I mean, next 20 or 30 years, from a cyber perspective, a lot will change. Technology emerging, quantum's right around the corner. We've had AI being spoken about all over for DTX. So we need to be championing that.
Yeah, 100%.
Anything else to add, Tree?
Just, it's so hard, I think, as a neurodivergent or disabled person sometimes to advocate and to have your voice and to the points that you have both just made, when people are doing that rather than seeing it as a negative, we should be creating space for that. We should be listening.
It's an opportunity to make things better for everyone.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We can learn so much from each other. We need to be just creating more space, I think, for everybody to get involved as well.
Yeah, definitely. Representation across, all areas. Gender, age, neurodiversity, ethnicity, religion, there's so many aspects.
Yeah.
Every person, like I said before, has all these different layers. Some people, everyone has different areas that they'll hold privilege in and different areas that have, through no fault of their own, been barriers to them.
Yeah.
And it's making sure that we are viewing each person as that individual with their own individual experiences, backgrounds, and making sure that we are making space for them, empowering them, giving them what they need to be happy and thrive and be impactful.
Absolutely. There's so many more things we can talk about, but we are going to wrap. It's been an absolute pleasure to have both of you on the podcast. Like I said, we're at DTX and it's a technology conference. I've been listening to a panel with both Emily and Tree, and I will speak to you all very, very soon. Bye.